James Oswald, author of the Tony Maclean series and also the Constant Fairchild series, which we'll be talking about this evening. These events are free, and we're also streaming to 30 libraries across Devon and Torbay this evening, so hello to everyone else watching. If you'd like to ask James a question, just pop it in the chat and I will ask him on your behalf. So James is the author of the Sunday Times best-selling Inspector Maclean series of detective mysteries. The first two of these, Natural Causes and the Book of Souls, were both shortlisted for the prestigious CWA Debut Dagger Award. That's always a mouthful. Set in Edinburgh, not so different to the one we all know, Detective Inspector Tony Maclean is the unlucky policeman who can see beneath the surface of an ordinary criminal life to the dark menace and evil that lurks beneath. James has also introduced to the world Detective Constable Constance Con Fairchild, whose first outing was in the acclaimed No Time to Cry. And this evening, we're going to be talking about the third book in the Con Fairchild series, which is called Nowhere to Run. So, hi, James. It's great to see you again.
Hi, it's nice to be invited back.
We're always delighted to have people back. Would you like to tell us about Nowhere to Run, please?
I will do my best. Nowhere to Run. If people don't know what it looks like this. That's my little bit of promo. It's to say it's the third Con Fairchild book, and Constance, rather than working for one particular police department, she works for the NCA now, which means that she can go all over the place. So I decided to move her to Wales for this book, for reasons which we'll probably discuss later. And it's really it's the story of how she stumbles across a smuggling ring, people and drug smuggling ring, and deals with the fallout of that and some really rather unpleasant people, and really just pushing her to the edge of, well, she's based in Wales, right on the coast, so she's got nowhere further that she can go. And what do you do when there's nowhere left to run?
Yeah, she's it was my first introduction to Constance Con.
Yes.
I really liked her. I sort of warmed to her immediately, and I mean, obviously starting on the third book, I will probably do what I did with Tony Maclean and start back at the beginning again, because I'm a bit hooked on those after last year, and I sort of really like the sort of supernatural element of those. Would you tell us a bit about Constance for those who haven't encountered her before? What sort of what's she like? What's she done? Sort of a quick sort of overview of her.
Oh, do that without doing too many spoilers.
She
came about, funnily enough, I moved publishers a few years back. I was with Penguin for the first 8 Inspector Maclean books, and I moved to Wildfire, which is an imprint at Headline, and I wanted a new character to start off there. So I came up with Constance, and I started very much with just the name, Constance. And I'd always wanted to write a character who was called Constance, but was anything but. So someone who was really flighty and unpredictable and unreliable and inconstant. But actually, as I just started writing her with this name, and she turned out to be completely the opposite. She's very, very true to her name. And she's a detective constable. She started off in the first book, No Time to Cry. She was a detective constable with the Met. And most of that book takes place in London. And that was another thing. I wanted to move out of Scotland and have some characters down in England. In the course of writing that book, I was thinking about, did I want to just be completely separate from the Inspector Maclean books, or did I want to have some reference to them at all? And I hit upon the cunning idea of having her meet some of the characters from the Maclean books, but not Tony Maclean himself. One of the favourite support characters from the Tony Maclean books turns up in the first Con Fairchild book, whilst she's investigating the murder of her boss, her detective inspector, who's her immediate boss. She has to flee up to Edinburgh, up to Scotland, and bumps into Madame Rose, who everyone likes. And it worked so well, and people were so pleased to see this other character coming in that I just had to then kind of bring the two series together. But again, I've never yet introduced her to Tony McClain. But she comes from quite a similar background to him. She's from a rich, moneyed family, but she's estranged from them mostly. But she's quite comfortable moving in those circles. So from that point of view, she's quite similar to McClain, but she's also very different. She's very, very independent-minded. She doesn't take fools well at all, and but she's always getting herself into trouble and then trying to get herself out of it. And she's great fun to write. She's much easier to write, I find, at the moment than Tony McClain. But that might be because I've only written 3 books with her, and I've written 12 with Tony.
Yeah, I guess it gets harder the more you write, because you've sort of covered a lot, and I guess you cover a lot of their backstory early on. So I guess you have to try and keep sort of reimagining more backstory or turning that into something else. Or I suppose when you've got 12, you can refer back to the other books, but I suppose readers
you have to be quite careful with that, because someone picks up book 12. And if it refers too much to things that happen in book 3, which they maybe haven't read, then they're not going to enjoy reading it. So I do try very hard to make all of my books approachable individually. So you can pick up any Tony McClain book, any Con Fairchild book, without having read any of the previous ones. But it's the fine line is doing that and still having everything in a series and having things work together and developing the characters as you go along. But yes, I do find you do struggle after a while to think of new things to write about a character, which I think is why a lot of authors who've done long series do tend to do second series or third series or whatever, just to give them a bit of a break and a refresher.
Is it difficult writing the 2 series concurrently? Because obviously, I mean, they're not, like you said, you haven't introduced them, the 2 main characters together, but obviously you are having to come up with those. Do you write like one year and one the next, and then so it's sort of separate?
Well, I have done so far, but I'm actually really rubbish at long-term planning. You might not believe it for someone who's written 12 novel series.
Yeah.
I never set out to do that particularly, and I also I'm not very good at the sort of strategic thinking. So I will write one Tony McClain book, and then a Con Fairchild book, and then another Tony McClain book. And at the moment, I'm writing something completely different, but we'll go into that later maybe. And it does mean that I can decide whether to refer to things that have happened in previous books, or just do it completely. There is actually in Nowhere to Run very little reference to Tony McClain and Madame Rose and people. There's just a little bit right at the end. But I won't say any more on that because I don't want to give too many spoilers. No. But yes, it's quite useful though, because you can just pluck characters from the different series and run and I did in the last Tony McClain book. I brought one of the characters from the first Con Fairchild book, had a bit more of a role in that book. So, but again, it's balancing it, doing that without people needing to have read the previous books. Is the line that I always try to pick. I always try to treat my books as standalones, but in a familiar universe, as it were.
Yeah, I think it's, I mean, I've read the first 3 Tony McClain ones now, which I've really enjoyed, but then I read them really close together, so I stopped because I was becoming a bit obsessed with him. But I really enjoyed them because I read them like one after the other. I started at the beginning and I'm on number 3, and I think so. I liked him, but he like I said, he's unlucky, isn't he? He has a lot of bad stuff happen to him.
But he keeps on picking himself up though. Yeah,
he did. Yeah.
I kind of got into that trick of writing, which is just to heap as much misery onto your protagonist as, yeah, what's the worst thing that could possibly happen, and you make that happen, and then you think, what's the next worst thing that could possibly happen after this, and you do that, and eventually people break. But I'd quite like doing that, but not having Tony McLean break. He always just sort of picks himself up, shakes himself off, and says, oh well, if that's what we've got to do, that's what we've got to do. Because I like doing that. It's quite makes him a bit different. Whereas Con, bless her, in Nowhere to Run, she's a little bit broken at the beginning of that.
She is, yeah, that's what I was going to say.
Because I've done the same thing to her in the previous two books. I've heaped all manner of nasty things on her. And I think, and I stopped and thought about it and thought, actually, you know, it's not realistic to have that, you know, all those things happen to you. Even if it's not physical injury, it's mental injury. You end up with some kind of PTSD. And I think it's important not, you know, you can't just have all manner of nasty things happening in one book and then start the next book as if nothing had ever happened.
Yeah.
So yeah.
So as you say, she's come to Aberystwyth, because it's a mouthful, to recover from after the death of her mother. She's on a leave of absence, and quite early on, I don't think it's giving a huge spoiler, because I think it's actually in the blurb, isn't it? She ends up in trouble herself, and then she meets is it Leela?
It depends how you want to pronounce it.
Yeah,
the problem is
but Leela or Lila.
When I'm reading it out to myself, I do both.
Yeah.
Leela, I think, probably.
But she's sort of drawn, isn't she? Her sort of spidey sense sort of tingles, doesn't she, when she meets her, and then she sort of becomes a bit, I don't want to say obsessed, but a little bit sort of interested in what's going on. And then she sees her again, doesn't she? And she starts to wonder what's going on, and that she knows that something's not quite right, because she's, you know, quite in tune with that sort of thing and what's going on. And then she sort of gets a visit from her boss, doesn't she? And then I won't give any more away, because obviously you need to read it, because it's really good. Because obviously she's, like you say, she's getting over the death of her mother. She's come away to sort of recover, and then again something not very nice happens to her, and she ends up in trouble for it, which I was like, that's not fair. But did you have, so you said that you sort of wanted to sort of stop that, but she does get drawn into this, like you said, the smuggling and the sort of what's going on in this little sort of small Welsh village that you can't really imagine that something would happen in. What made you sort of set it in, you know, in this little, you know, smallish Welsh town, I guess you could call it a town.
Aberystwyth, you know, it is small, but it's a university town, so it's quite, you know, it is reasonable size. I actually lived and worked in about 15 miles inland from Aberystwyth for the first decade of this millennium, on a research farm, called Powden Research Farm in Cymystveth. And I know, having lived there for 10 years, I know the area reasonably well. I used to drive around visiting farms and farmers and stuff. And I always loved the coastline, from Aberystwyth down to Aberystwyth. There's all these cliffs and little caves and stuff. And it's, I mean, I don't know if there is actually a history of smuggling there, but if there isn't, there should be.
Yeah.
And I just kind of thought, you know, in the olden days, you've got this sort of romantic image of smuggling in sort of tobacco and rum and beating the excise man and all this sort of stuff. But actually, you know, modern day smuggling is cocaine and people being trafficked for sex work, and it's not romantic at all.
Not at all, no.
And I thought, but that's what they, you know, it's that old history of smuggling, and they're going to still be doing it, but it's just not savoury anymore. And I thought it would be quite fun to, you know, to have that, to look into that, to investigate that side of things. And the Welsh setting really was just me wanting to write something set in this place that I'd lived for 10 years. So, you know, that's kind of, I start with thinking, let's set this book in Wales. How am I going to do that? And that then kind of leads into, Con's going to Wales. Why is she going to Wales? Either she's sent there to investigate, or, which works out more for the way my mind works, she's there for another reason and stumbles upon it, because that's more dramatically pleasing.
That's the word I was looking for. Stumbles. Yes, she
definitely stumbles into trouble. She's a weirdness magnet, a trouble finder, despite her better nature.
She wasn't what I thought when I first, because like I said, I hadn't read any before, and then when I started reading it, I was quite surprised that she was the Honourable Constance,
Lady Constance.
Lady Constance.
Called.
And how she's staying with sort of friends, isn't she? Again, who are sort of they're sort of gentry, aren't they? And but she calls them. You don't know that, and then it drops in that they are they're sort of sort of gentry as well. And but I like that. I like that the book surprised me quite a lot, and I like a book that surprises me. I sort of thought she was going to be, I thought she might be another sort of downtrodden sort of female detective, which I do like a detective with a lot of them are a bit have dysfunctional relationships and things, don't they? Seems to become.
I mean, she does have she comes from a rich aristocratic background, but we find out in the first book that she's very much abandoned that and gone out. She's pissed off her father by saying that she's going to be a police officer rather than marrying some rich lord and producing grandchildren. So she's kind of been written out of the family, and she's that was very much a part of her character, that she's very comfortable with these the aristocrats, but she's also doesn't really want to have anything to do with them if she doesn't have to. But she's also she doesn't really fit in the police either, because she's slightly different. She's better educated than most of the other detective constables and uniformed constables that she came up through the ranks with. And despite, I mean, in the first book, she's about 30 and she's still a detective constable. Most career police officers in their 30s would at least expect to be a detective inspector. But she's never managed to be promoted because she rubs people up just slightly the wrong way in the police force. So she's still a detective constable, which is much to her annoyance. She could probably do with a slightly better pay, but so that's kind of her character. She's quite good at mingling with people, but she doesn't really fit in with anyone.
Do you sort of, because I remember you said last year that you hadn't sort of pictured what Tony McClane looked like, when I think I asked you who you think would play him if he was in a TV show, and you said you didn't really know you'd never really sort of imagined what he looked like. Is that the same with Con? Have you sort of?
Pretty much. She has very bright red hair, which is the only physical description that I think I've used for her in any of the books. Again, it's the same thing, because the books are written from her point of view and they're actually written in first person. She doesn't really have any need to describe herself, so there's no narrative reason within the books to describe her. The red hair is important to the first story, so we make something of that. But apart from that, no, I don't really know what she looks like at all. And the main reason why she's never met Tony McClane and probably won't in any of the books is because then, depending on which book it was happening in, I would have to describe one or the other. Because there would be one of the characters would be seeing the other one. And I'd have to make my mind up.
You have to decide what they will look like.
So I'm waiting for someone to come along and make a television story, a series about it, and then I can say, Tony McClane looked like such and such an actor, or Con Fairchild looked like such and such an actress. But I don't know. I'm not really that big on doing these long physical descriptions of characters. I think when you meet someone for the first time, you'll notice a few things about them, but you won't sometimes you read these paragraphs and paragraphs about people, and it gives all the details about them, the color of their eyes. I couldn't tell you what the color of my own eyes are, let anybody else's. And so those sort of details are not important to me.
No.
But if a detail is important, it will come up in the story. But I'm much more interested in how people behave, how they interact with each other, than what they actually look like. For my stories, at least, anyway.
That sort of leads me nicely into the details, because the book is written in COVID times, isn't it? Early on, you've got perspex screens and social distancing, and social bubbles are all mentioned. Did you write this book during lockdown, and how did it come that you decided to sort of set it in that time?
I did write it during lockdown. I wrote it in the second half of last year, and I'd finished it just before Christmas last year, so a year ago. And I decided that I didn't want to make it a lockdown novel, as it were.
No.
But I didn't want to ignore the lockdown entirely, or the pandemic entirely. The slight problem is you write something a year ago, and I'd written it hoping that we would be out of it by the spring, when the book was actually set. And we were sort of coming out of it, but then we went back into it again. And so it's always difficult to second guess. But what it did do was it gave me a reason for Con having gone to Wales for a month or 6 weeks leave, to then end up being there for the best part of a year. And there was quite a long gap between writing the second book and writing this third book. So there was quite a gap. And this helped to explain why she was away for so long. But it's a bit of a nightmare trying to work out, because the rules and regulations are different everywhere. So the rules in England are different to the rules in Wales, are different to the rules in Scotland. And I live on a farm and don't go anywhere anyway, so I don't really know even what the rules are in Scotland. I tried to be not too detail oriented, just making a nod to it here and there. There's not much mask wearing going on in this book. They have had, the vaccine has arrived, so they've all had their, some of them have had their vaccines, and some of them get them during the book. But apart from that, it's just a useful thing to hang a bit of the plot on, but it's not a central driver.
It sort of gives you like the timeline of that it's sort of modern as well, rather than without having to give anybody can pick that up and will know in 10 years time that it was set around
when it was. It happened in 2020 or 2021 or maybe 2022.
Oh no,
who knows, 2023.
Let's hope not. How did you what made you sort of decide? You said she's sort of linked in with the other character in, so sorry, did she appear in the Tony McClain book and then turn into Con, or did she appear in
she hasn't. Con hasn't appeared in any of the Tony McClain books,
right?
But her sister Izzy turns up in Bury Them Deep. Is it Bury Them Deep? See, now you've put me on the spot. I've written so many books, I can't remember what happens in which one. Which one is it? Which has got the witches in it? No, that's What Will Burn. Con's sister turns up in What Will Burn, which I should know about because that's the most recent Tony McClain.
I was going to say that's the one that we talked about. Yeah,
exactly. So that's Con's sister turns up in that one. But Madame Rose turns up in 2 Con Fairchild books, and in the second Con Fairchild book, she goes up to, and I not give away too much. Con goes up to Edinburgh and she meets Janie Harrison and Grumpy Bob and Madame Rose again. So
love Grumpy Bob.
The second, I love Grumpy Bob, or Bob Lagrogne as he is in French. I think that's such a superb. But so I'm having some of the secondary characters, the support characters, get to meet her in her books, but as yet I haven't had her turn up in a. I think she gets mentioned in the last 2 McClain books, but she's not actually appeared yet. And I think maybe I'll keep her and Tony apart, because it could be messy if they were to ever actually meet.
Yeah. Oh yeah, that could be very complicated, couldn't it? Did you How do you research? How did you sort of research? Particularly with this, you've got the smuggling and things. Did you do? I mean, obviously you wrote it, and I know that a lot of people do that research online. And did you sort of do that, or do you have? I can't remember whether you said before that you had a contact that you sort of spoke to about police procedural and things, or
I do have a number of contacts, particularly with the Scottish Police Scotland, but I don't very often use them because I don't really want to be writing. I mean, I know I technically do write police procedurals because they're police investigations, but I'm not really that interested in the procedure side of things. This is why I quite like to have, your maverick cop who's going off doing her own thing rather than being part of a team. Although she does lean heavily on her team, particularly poor old Karen Eve, who's always getting called in to do the hard work. But I do that sort of deliberately, partly because I personally find a lot, if you read a book and it's got reams and reams of procedure in it, it can get quite dull. Yeah. But also I'm very, very lazy and I don't like doing the research and then working out how to put the research into the book without it showing that it's the research in the book. So I kind of make a lot of it up or write around a lot of it so it's not necessary, and focus instead more on the characters, how they're interacting with each other, and the looking at the non-police side of it, so what the criminals are doing, rather than saying, well, we've found a dead body, this is what we do, we have to inform this person, the duty doctor's got to pronounce it dead, then the pathologist has got to come and inspect it, and then we can move it to the mortuary, and all that sort of stuff. I mean, some people do find that really interesting, and there are better writers than me who write really good, forensically detailed police procedurals. I'm much more interested in not doing that and leaning more into the sort of thriller side of things, so that more action driven than procedure.
And also with Tony's novels, you've got that sort of supernatural element, and I was quite intrigued when you sort of write his book. So the Book of Souls I really enjoyed, and I can't give too much away about it, but I'm really interested in how did the sort of historical plot, let's say, did that come first, or did you sort of think about that and then sort of weave it into the rest of what was happening, or did that sort of materialize as you were writing?
Most of my books kind of materialize as I'm writing. You're putting me on the spot a bit here because I wrote the Book of Souls 10 years ago.
Sorry.
It's the one remember.
with the flat in the wall, the wall, the flat that had the wall and the body in the wall.
That's the first one. That's Natural Causes.
Oh, is that first? Is that the first one?
That's the first one. Yes, that's.
Oh no, the Book of Souls is sorry. It's the book in the bookshop, isn't it? Yeah. No, sorry. That's the first one. Yeah.
Natural Causes I wrote in 2005, so 16 years ago. Yes. I mean, actually, Natural Causes started off as a short story, which didn't have a lot of obviously the back history and stuff in it, but it was kind of much more focused on the current day and the various people coming to sticky ends, and then Tony McLean finally working out why they're all coming to sticky ends. So I did kind of write that first, and then I went back at it and thought, how do we expand it and how do we explain what's going on without explaining what's going on, because obviously what's going on is a bit weird. And
really good.
Well, thank you. So that's, but I do tend to, I don't plot before writing. I tend to plot as I'm writing, which does involve a lot of rewriting once the first draft is done. But that I prefer to do it that way, because if I try to plot something and write a detailed outline, I get very bored. I can't stick to the outline when I start writing. I go off at weird tangents. So I've just decided let's not bother with the outline. Let's just write the book first, and then try and make some sense of it, which doesn't always work.
No, well, I mean, lots of people write, differently, don't they? And some people do really plot heavily, and then others just go more free range as
there's no right or wrong way to do it.
just what
it's
works,
what works for you.
Definitely.
And the trick is being able to, and it's not always the same for each book. I have plotted some books much more meticulously than others, and sometimes you've got to plot out in quite some detail a series of scenes if it's important how they all string together. As like the book that I'm writing at the moment, there's some stuff that happened in the past which is uncovered in the present, and I've got the scenes where you see the things happening in the past, and they've got to link in with things happening in the present. So it all has to be a little bit plotted out. But then I'm writing them out of order because I'm writing the scenes in the past one after another, because that gets a voice in my head for the character that it's all happening to in the past, and it's easier to keep that going. And then I have to weave it all in together in kind of the first edit, as it were. But that's for this kind of book. For another, when I write the next Con Fairchild book, I might just sit down and think, well, where's she going to be this time? She's been in England, Scotland, and Wales. Must be time to send her to Ireland. And then just go. And then I could start just like that. Okay, she's in Ireland. What's she doing in Ireland? Come up with a reason for her being in Ireland. What's happening there to her? And the book just kind of comes out of that. So that's how I write a lot of books, and I would caution writers not necessarily to do it that way, because it can do your head in. But it works for me.
Well, that's the main thing, isn't it? And you said what are you writing at the moment? Is it, you said it wasn't either
it's a standalone book, and it's though curiously it is set in Wales, and I can't really give too much away about it because I'm not entirely sure exactly how it starts and ends, because I'm in the process of writing the first draft. But it's not linked at all to Tony McLean or Con Fairchild or anything that I've written before. It is a complete independent standalone. Hope to get a first draft of that finished by the end of the year, but I have been struggling a bit recently. I've written 3 novels during the pandemic, and I sort of blithely thought, that's fine, there's no distractions, get on, I could do all this stuff. And I just hit a wall when I finished writing All That Lives, which is the next Tony McLean book, which is out in February. There's a plug. And I just it was like my brain just stopped. I couldn't write anything for a while, and I think that was just the 2 years of stress. Everyone's stressed as much as some people a lot more than me, but that was just how it finally hit me, and I'm just clawing my way out of that at the moment.
That is a lot, isn't it?
Different book. Yeah.
3 in that a period of time is a lot to write.
I've written I've basically written 2 books a year for the last 10 years, so it's par for the course for me, but I just maybe that's finally catching up with me.
Well, also you didn't have a pandemic to deal with. I think everybody sort of thinks that that does add a lot more stress to the mix, doesn't it? Than
I mean, materially it hasn't affected me. I'm living on the farm. I'm distanced anyway. I don't often travel anywhere. It's been sad. I haven't been able to do library events and things because we haven't been going to libraries, but doing these Zoom things is fine. You think it doesn't affect you very much, but you're getting the news every day. You're getting the constant drip feed of have we got a new variant and all this sort of stuff, and it does weigh you down. I mean, I've endless sympathy for the people who are actually there in it, people working in the front line of the NHS in places, who are having to deal with it physically as well as just mentally. But I think it gets to even me after a while.
Even up in the Scottish hills with the cows.
Absolutely. Well, the cows are they're a very good tension reliever. They just go up the hill with a brush and give them a bit of a brush. And
they know nothing about it, do they? So it's nice.
No, they don't care. Well, curiously, it wasn't last summer, it was the first summer of 2020. God, it's been going on for so long. Summer of 2020, late spring, early summer of 2020. The hill that's the centre of my farm is a really popular walking spot, and there were 10 times as many people walking there as normal. And the cows did start to get a little bit anxious. You could see when I went up, particularly the ones that were calving, they were just a little bit on edge sometimes when I went up there. And you'd look up to the top of the hill and there's 20 people up there, whereas normally you wouldn't see anyone. You think, oh yes, they've just all walked through there, and they're not disturbing the cows particularly. They're not going out of their way to do anything. It's just a huge
unusual
extra volume. Yeah, but I just moved them to another field and they're fine.
They're happy back in.
And we haven't had, so far, touch wood, we haven't had anyone chased. So
no,
because that's always a worry.
Yeah.
They are quite placid, the Highland cows. That's one of the reasons why I have them. Generally speaking.
We have bullocks near us, and they can be a bit sort of inquisitive, I'd say. But they do, or some charging at you sometimes when you're walking through.
Yeah, the worst ones are what I call the teenagers. So there's 1 or 2 year olds, and there's the steers, the castrated males, and they all run in a mob, and they're not necessarily being aggressive, though sometimes they can be, but they're just overexcited and they bounce around and they weigh half a ton. So you have to be quite careful.
You don't want that happening, running towards you. I know they say the worst thing you can do is run, but when you've got one coming towards you, it's very hard just to stand there and go, okay, I'm just going to stand here.
Oh, absolutely. I do. I mean, I worry a bit because I've taken to posting videos of me brushing them or feeding them or whatever on Twitter, which is very popular. But I do sometimes worry that people might think that they can walk into the middle of a field of cows and brush them or whatever. I can do that because I know these cows and they know that I feed them, and I was there when they were born and everything.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, I do always caution people if you see a field full of cows, be very wary, and if you don't have to go through it, don't go through it.
I've got a nice comment from Simon, who says, a wonderful conversation with James, one of my favourite authors. Every book I read, I enjoy, and he comes across as a genuinely nice guy. Great to see how he works and how the ideas go from the mind to the page. So that's a really nice comment. Thank you, Simon.
Well, thank you, Simon.
I just see we're coming up to the end, James. As usual, it's gone really, really quickly. Is there anything you have read lately that you'd like to recommend to our watchers?
Yes, well, lots of books. I would say anyone who hasn't subscribed to my newsletter, I do book recommendations in my newsletter every month.
Great.
Which you can find on my website. But a number of great books. I listen to a lot of audiobooks, and I'm currently listening to The Wolf Den by Elodie Harper.
Oh, that's amazing.
Absolutely brilliant book. Really, really enjoying that. What else have I read recently that I really enjoyed? Adrian Tchaikovsky's new one, Shards of Earth, which is science fiction books. Very, very good. Adrian is a sickeningly good writer. And what have I? I've just finished something. What did I just finish recently? This is terrible. I know.
Sorry, I always do it. Put everybody on the spot.
No, I'm dreadful. I was thinking about this the other day actually, because I quite often get sent books to read by editors, hoping that I'll write nice things. And I read a book. I love a book, and then I really, really struggle to write and say why I liked the book. And I think that, for me, that's a measure of how good a book is. If I can't think why I liked it, that's because I've really enjoyed the story and the words haven't got in the way. So that's the mark of a really good book. And the book that I read, that I just finished, I have remembered it now because I've managed by bloviating a little bit to remember it. It's the new one from David Bishop, D.V. Bishop, which is The Darkest Sin. It's not out until March next year, but look out for it. It's the second in his series set in 16th century Florence, and it's absolutely brilliant. His lead character, Cesare Aldo, who's a detective as such in historical times, and this one he's investigating a dead man is found, man's murdered body found in a nunnery. And it's just, I mean, they're beautifully written, really, really good the story really carries you along. And as I say, it's one of these books that I find really difficult to say why I enjoyed it, because I just enjoyed it.
Well, that can be just as good
yeah,
sometimes, just to say I like it.
Yep.
I enjoyed it.
It gets a thumbs up from me. The Darkest Sin by D.B.
The Darkest Sin. Great, brilliant. Thank you. That's amazing. Thank you so much for joining us again, James. And we'll be waiting to see Tony McLean number 12.
Number 12.
12, yeah, in February.
All That Lives comes out in February the 17th, I think it is, something like that.
So we'll be looking forward to that one. And if you haven't encountered Constance before, then I would definitely recommend that you read this. I mean, I've read this one on its own without reading the others, but I will be going back to read the others because I'm intrigued to find out more about her. But as you say, you can read them as standalones, and you can order from our friends at the Bookery or online at Devon Libraries or Torbay Libraries. So if you would like to order any of James's books, they are all available. Our next In Conversation is tomorrow night, and it'll be our last one of this year, and that's with author Nadia Hetherington and her book A Girl Made of Air, and that'll be at 7 o'clock here on Facebook Live. Thank you so much, James, for joining us again. It's been great to see you, and I hope you have a calm winter up in Scotland and manage to get your writing mojo back so that you can continue your fantastic writing.
Thank you. It's been wonderful talking to you.
Thank you.